Hello and welcome to Within the Frame. Coming to you live from Seoul, I'm Han Da-eun. U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris, now the official Democratic presidential nominee, has upended the presidential race, showing a small lead over the once seemingly invincible rival, Donald Trump. After picking Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as her running mate, Harris has kicked off her battleground state tour, seeking center-left sweet spot in the election battle. Trump's running mate, Vance, meanwhile, mirrored his opponent's movements as he held events in the same states, but without Trump. All this as a tug-of-war continued between Harris and Trump over setting up a TV debate against each other, an event that could potentially have a significant impact on the race for the White House. Would the Democratic enthusiasm last? What would be the key watch points over the next 90 days? Where do Harris and Trump stand on critical election issues such as the economy? For some clues, we turn to Min Jung-hun, professor at the Korea National Diplomatic Academy, who joins us in the studio. Thank you, as always, for coming in today.
My pleasure.
So, recent polls showed Harris moving ahead of her Republican rival, Donald Trump. Survey USA put Harris up 3 points ahead of Trump, while CBS News made it a 1-point Harris lead, just to name a few. The results were mostly within the margin of error. What factors led to the rapid surge of Harris, and what do you think will be the key to winning the race over the next 90 days?
Yes, and as you mentioned, we can see some public opinion polls that Harris is ahead of Trump, but within the margin of error, like the 1 to 3 percentage point lead. But I think it's a meaningful result for Democrats because Trump has led the public opinion polls since the October last year. And I think the rapid surge of Harris is mainly caused by the situation where Democratic supporters are gathering on the Harris candidacy. After Biden's disappointing performance in the first presidential debate in late June, many of them were pessimistic about Biden's candidacy of winning the November election, and they wanted Biden to drop out of the race. And it's not still clear whether Harris has got enough political or electoral capability to defeat Trump in November, but it seems that Democratic supporters think that Harris should be better than Biden, and they are more enthusiastic about supporting her. So I think basically Trump has got his own time last month, but this month is time for Harris. And the tough competition between the two candidates will come back next month. And the second presidential debate will be very important for Harris to demonstrate her political capability to presidential voters. And if she meets or exceeds the expectation, or simply she does better than expected, she will be positively perceived by the voters, and she will get some kind of a credit out of the event. But otherwise, the honeymoon effect for Harris will decrease. So we will see what will actually happen in the coming weeks.
And for another voice, joining us from New York is John Zogby, founder and senior partner at John Zogby Strategies. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning.
So the Democratic National Committee has announced that Vice President Kamala Harris has secured the support of 99% of delegates to formally become the Democratic Party's presidential nominee. Tell us about the significance of Harris's win.
Well, it is the 99%. There have been seriously challenged nominations in the past, some of which have ultimately hurt the person who won the nomination because there was bitterness on the part of those that did not support the front runner. In this case, what the Democrats needed was unity and no bitterness, and they got it. You can't really do much better than 99%, can you? And so in that sense, then, she goes into her convention with a bump, with a measure of goodwill, with what so far looks to be an ideal running mate, and she should get, as it normally happens, another honeymoon period during and following her convention. Now, none of that assures victory, but what it does assure is so far the transition from President Biden and all of the questions that had been raised about President Biden's mental capacity and his age, those are off the table. It is now Harris's path and Harris and Walz's path together.
Well, Harris saw overwhelming support after President Biden left the race, as you mentioned, and she also became the first woman of color to lead a major party ticket. So it seems her nomination holds significance in many different ways. And staying with you, Dr. Zogby, the Harris campaign is seeing a strong surge of support among young voters in key swing states as well. Some are calling it the Kamala Harris youthquake. The Morning Consult polling showed Harris leading Trump 48% to 44%. What drives her popularity among the youth?
And that 48-44 figure is exactly what my poll is showing. And so we mirror this Morning Consult poll of a 4-point lead. You know, in order for a Democrat to win, they need to put together what we call the Obama coalition of those groups that thrust Barack Obama into election and then re-election. And broadly speaking, when Joe Biden was in the race, he was slipping among a number of key voting groups, but in particular among youth. He was polling in the mid-40s, whereas he had received as high as 60 and then 66% of the support of 18 to 29-year-olds. We see in this first Kamala Harris poll that she's polling 59% of young people, not quite yet matching Barack Obama's output, but a whole lot closer than when Biden was in the race. Now, why? I think some of it has to do with Gaza, and that college-age young people and young people of color who were very turned off by the Biden administration's response to the war in Gaza are coming back home to the Democratic Party. She has a softer position, and apparently it looks like Governor Walz has a softer position. And then, of course, there is the issue of student debt and the issue of inflation, which are very difficult to tackle. But President Biden, has been trying, but he lost his capacity to dominate the message that he wanted to send during the campaign because everything became clouded on the issue of age and mental acuity.
Young voters could play a key role in the upcoming presidential election, and many of them seem to be much more energized and enthusiastic than when they faced a race between Biden and Trump. And as you mentioned, student debt, inflation, and the war in Gaza are some of the issues that they seem to be very much interested in. Professor Min, so Vice President Kamala Harris, she has chosen Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as her running mate, and she formally introduced him during a Philadelphia rally on Tuesday, where the two officially kicked off their battleground state tour. Who is Tim Walz? Why was he chosen? And what sort of impact would he bring to the race?
Yes, Harris chose the Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as her running mate. And Walz is 60 years old, but it's a little bit harder to believe, but he is in the same age with Harris. And he was a member of the U.S. House of Representatives from 2007 to 2019. And he represented Minnesota's first congressional district. And then he served as the Minnesota governor. And but he was born in West Point, Nebraska, not Minnesota. And after high school, he joined the Army National Guard and had a bullet-collar manufacturing job, like the factory worker. And he later graduated from a college in Nebraska and moved to Minnesota and worked as a high school social studies teacher and football coach. So I think his career shows why he was chosen as a VP candidate. Harris mentioned that she liked his policies, Midwestern appeal, and the likelihood that he would be a loyal running mate and governing partner. Specifically regarding his policies, during his gubernatorial terms, Walz signed various legislations like free school meals and bolstering state infrastructure, gun background checks, and codifying the abortion rights, and free college tuition for low-income families. So it shows that he has made achievements for the progressive agendas. In addition, it seems that Walz has potential to speak to rural voters like Midwestern appeal. He was raised in rural Nebraska, and he's the son of a homemaker and a public school administrator. And he enlisted in the Army National Guard at the age of 17. And meanwhile, he spoke out in favor of the assault weapons ban, but he's the hunter who doesn't oppose to the basically gun ownership. And interestingly, he received the A rating from the National Rifle Association, NRA. So it shows that he went through an ordinary rural person's life in the Midwest, and his the biographical background can appeal to the Midwestern rural voters like people in Michigan and Wisconsin. And the last but not least, it seems that Harris felt a good chemistry with the Walz after interviewing with him. During the VP selection process, loyalty was emphasized as one of the most important criteria for Harris. So her selection of Walz suggests that she trusts Walz not only help her win the election, but also to help her govern. But the problem with him is that voters don't know much about him. So they needed to work hard to let voters know about him during the presidential campaigns in the coming weeks and months.
So a 90-day full sprint is expected, and we'll see how Harris and her good chemistry with Walz what sort of an impact that would have in the tight race between Harris and Trump. We'll see how it goes. And Dr. Zogby, an intense tug-of-war between Harris and Trump over a potential presidential TV debate, with each in favor of a different broadcaster and date. Give us your thoughts and your prospects for this.
You know, this Joe Biden leaving the race really threw off the Trump presidential plans, because he was all set to debate what he perceived to be a weakened Joe Biden, and we saw that happen certainly in the first debate. And he was prepared to pummel harder against Joe Biden and to really hammer away at Mr. Biden's age and his mental acuity. And that was taken away from him. And now there is a fresh face. There is a woman of color. Trump will have to be very careful not to be a bully. And by the same token, he's going to have to be forced to discuss some issues instead of mean-spirited one-liners, which he often has seemed to be able to get away with. And so in many ways, this has thrown off his plans. And the ABC News debate was to be seen by the Trump administration as a crowning achievement. He had not so much won the first debate against Joe Biden, but Biden lost the first debate. The second time around was just supposed to be sweeping the floor. But now there's energy on the part of the Democratic candidate and the team. There's joy, as Governor Walz pointed out. There is, at least as far as the early polls are concerned, a return of some of the anxiety-ridden Democratic coalition members, blacks and Hispanics and suburban women and younger voters. They seem to be returning back to the fold, and that's a completely different context than former President Trump was prepared to do. So of course there's going to be a battle over these debates.
And Mr. Trump, he just yesterday said that he will debate Harris, and an announcement on that is expected soon. So we'll see how things pan out. Professor Min, U.S. recession fears, as reflected in the global stock market chaos that we saw earlier this week, has once again put economy in the election spotlight. How would economic uncertainties shape the landscape of the tight race between Harris and Trump?
Yes, basically the economic uncertainties, like economic recession fears, are not good for Harris because the Biden government should be responsible for the economic situation of the country. And as you know, Harris is the number 2 person of the government. So Trump criticizes Harris for the negative news for the U.S. economy. But I think it's not clear whether or how much such economic uncertainties could affect the vote intention of the presidential voters before the November election. As you know, President Biden has argued that his government did a good job for the U.S. economy, like inflation has decreased to around 3%, unemployment rate is pretty low, and many domestic jobs were created. But voters are still reluctant to accepting his argument because the cost of living is still too high in the country. So the COVID-19 pandemic messed up the supply chains and the prices went up for everything, including gas, food, and rent. So voters complain, like, I'm just getting by, but nothing left for the future. Prices are too high and everything has gone up. So of course, the possibility of the economic uncertainties is not a good news for the U.S. economy, but it's not certain how voters would perceive the economic uncertainties in relation to the inflation and the cost of living, and therefore it's not clear how much it could affect the voters' daily lives and their financial situations before the election day. So I think the most important economic factor that could have a critical impact on vote intention is the cost of living. So we need to see how the economic recession fears will be connected to voters' perceptions about inflation and the cost of living.
And Dr. Zogby, the killing of Hamas political chief Ismail Haniyeh and escalating tensions in the Middle East is also expected to have an impact on the U.S. presidential race. Would Harris's Middle East approach depart from Biden's?
In some ways, it would, if we focus on what started this round, and that is the Gaza, October 7th invasion of Israel, and then the response. In that regard, we do see that Kamala Harris early on expressed an empathy for the people of Gaza and said, yes, Israel has a right to defend itself, but the way it defends itself is something that we should care deeply about. In addition, when the student demonstrators were really taking over campuses all across the United States, and at several points in New York and California and in Chicago and elsewhere, when there appeared to be the approach to violence, real violence, she and Governor Walz expressed some sympathy for the demonstrators, not for violent tactics, but for what the demonstrators were saying. That could be something that does appear to be something that could appeal to younger college age voters, bringing that back into the fold, and also something that could signal a change in direction of U.S. policy. Yes, support for Israel, but within bounds.
So largely a continuation of the Biden administration's foreign policy, but Harris will have her distinct nuances. Professor Min, before we let you go, is South Korea ready to welcome Harris or Trump as the next leader of its closest allied nation?
Yes, absolutely. Regardless of which candidate would win the November election, South Korea will definitely respect the result of the upcoming election, and it is ready to gladly work with the next U.S. government. Basically, I think the ROK-U.S. alliance will remain strong, and the bilateral cooperation between the two countries will be maintained or strengthened after the November election. It's mainly because the strategic interests and considerations of the two countries will not change drastically just because of the upcoming presidential election. The ROK-U.S. alliance has been the irreplaceable foundation for South Korea's security, peace, and prosperity. And the alliance is also important for maintaining U.S. strategic interests in East Asia and Indo-Pacific. And South Korea is one of its key allies that U.S. could trust in terms of maintaining its leadership in the region. Of course, which candidate would win the upcoming presidential election could affect how the two countries would operate the alliance and how much more South Korea could play a great role and make a bigger financial contribution. But these matters should be manageable and will not make an impact on the durability of the alliance. So again, South Korea is ready to respect the outcome of the upcoming U.S. presidential election, and it is eager to closely work together with the next U.S. government.
So decades-old South Korea-U.S. alliance is bigger than the possible change of U.S. government. Thank you, as always, Professor Min, for your in-depth analysis.
Thank you.
And many thanks to you as well, Dr. Zogby, for sharing your valuable perspectives.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you for watching, and be sure to tune in same time tomorrow to join our conversation. Goodbye for now.